Welcome to our first Mental Health Australia's first Members Policy Forum for the year. We're really encouraged that so many of you have made such an effort to come from so many different places to be part of our deliberations today. We gathered here almost 12 months ago to the day, and we heard from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, and we went and spoke to some 45 members and senators in this place about our shared agenda. And the feedback that we've had, our own assessment of that day, is that it was an incredibly powerful and rich and strong thing for us to be doing as an organisation. So we're hopeful that with a longer run-up to an election campaign, we may well be able to build on that advocacy day and build an even stronger set of activities going forward that you can be supportive of and you can be engaged in. It's an opportunity for us to start to understand better what we think the opportunities are in the current political environment and how we might start to shape up some of our response to that environment. So Jennifer, I might call on you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Good to see such a good turnout. What I think we've got to do today is start thinking about two things: how you frame up as we lead into an election, but also as you lead into next year's budget. So to Frank's point, and can I thank Frank and his team for all the work they put into the budget submission, you're kind of always behind the cycle, and I sometimes think it's a purposeful strategy on behalf of governments. But the 2018-19 budget, if we assume the election cycle will go to course, will be an election budget. And it's really what's in that budget now that we have to focus on. So let me just, a bit of an assessment. I think we are still in a tremendous period of uncertainty and instability. And I see a lot of organisations now assuming a change of government is coming. And I think that is a shocking risk. The most effective organisations will be the organisations that stick to principle and integrity, that have clarity and consistency of policy, which I'll come back to. But it's a tremendous risk. If a week is a long time in politics, a year is an eternity. And a lot is changing. It's a very dynamic environment. And I'll talk a little bit about local versus national. The interesting thing that is happening, of course, is the role of the media in really not setting any long-term agenda, and that's a problem, I think, for our country. Andrew, who you're hearing from today, is probably one of the better journalists of Australia and a person I've got tremendous respect for. But there's far too much gotcha stuff and far too much forcing politicians to rule things out, rule things in, go on the back foot, and instead of allowing an idea to sort of get out there and have people talk about it. So one suggestion is that as part of our leading into next year, we do have to find two journalists in a national paper and something like the Herald Age kind of consortia that will write about mental health and that will seek you out for comment and start running a series on that. And I'm quite happy to sit down with the editors of those papers and try and get that to happen. The Senate is still a very unpredictable creature. And I think it will be even more unpredictable in the wake of the South Australian election, where Nick Xenophon has not been able to hold a seat, and so there will be a massive question mark over his authority in the party. My suggestion for our Advocacy Day, Frank, in advance of that, and I'm happy to kind of run on this, is to get two political serious hitters, like say a Brian Loughnane from the Liberal Party, a George Wright from the Labor Party, to sort of take you through who is in the Senate and who we should be working hard at. You can spend a lot of time as small organisations flogging dead horses, or you can focus and actually be effective with people who are sympathetic to your agenda. And there are people on both sides of politics who are very sympathetic to this agenda, and there are people on the crossbench who are as well. So that's a little bit of the political stuff. I think the state election results have been very interesting, and I think you're seeing a change in the dynamic. Now, what does it end up looking like? I don't know. So in terms of where we are on an election cycle, to Frank's point, I don't think the government is likely to go this year, but things happen. and things happen on citizenship. The government is still on a knife edge. So my suggestion is that we have to have a high degree of preparedness to swing into action with some very specific things. The second thing that we need to start thinking about is local versus regional and national campaigning. I think local campaigning and regional campaigning is going to become more important than ever, because increasingly governments are going to be won and lost in particular areas. So if you think about South Australia, at the previous election, the Liberal Party won the majority of the vote and not the majority of seats, because they didn't kind of tackle that local issue. This time they focused on 3 or 4 key seats they had to win, and they poured a lot of resources into it. That's what's happened. That will be what happens at the federal election. So local is huge, regional is huge. Business Council has started doing a lot of regional campaigning. The other point to make about regions is that, and you are better informed on this than I am, I think they are just abandoned in the national debate. So much of the political discourse, policy discourse, is framed by people in Melbourne, inner Sydney and Canberra. And, I was in Townsville and Cairns a couple of weeks ago, Adelaide last week. That is not the conversation people are having in those communities where things are very difficult. So, we have to reach out to those people, reach across the kind of conversation that I think is really at odds with where the bulk of Australians are. The other thing is to use your network. So who follows Mental Health Australia on Twitter? See, it's not everyone. So, the kind of resources we've got in the organisation, we're not going to be able to do. Big TV advertising, even local advertising. I can tell you, as someone who does this, it's hugely expensive. But the best thing is to use the networks that we've got. The members of the organisation who can actually, not just on Twitter and Facebook, but start to enter local newspapers, get local conversations happening, use your network. So I think as a target, by the next time we meet, we should all be following us on Twitter and retweeting things, entering conversations, informing what are often ill-informed debates, but also using your local networks to get the message to your local members. And hopefully that'll be something you think about today as a strategy. I think we've got a good and optimistic environment to actually work in. So we had the Prime Minister here last year. He's very supportive of this issue. He and I have talked about it a few times, but he is a give me an idea kind of guy. We had Greg Hunt here last year, who I thought gave a fantastic speech, but I was surprised how much cynicism there was towards it. And I think we underestimate, this is a very strong minister. It doesn't matter what your party politics is, right? You've got to work with what you've got. And here is a minister who understands this issue, who's committed to it, who wants to make an impact here. And we've had so many ministers in this space for whom that issue has not been important. He wants to do something in this space, and we should try and work with him to do it. And that's not about party politics. That's about, he's a minister, he is the minister, and it's about getting ideas, specific things on his agenda, because they'll become important in the government's framing next year. And of course, we had Bill Shorten here, who's also very committed to mental health as a priority. So it's not like we've got a kind of bipartisan problem here. We don't have either side of politics who doesn't see this as an important issue, who is ignoring the issue. That's not our problem. I can assure you in my other world, that is a problem. But we don't have that problem here. So that our challenge is to do a couple of things. First of all, we have got to frame up the issue more clearly and the problems more clearly. And you can't go to politicians in budget-constrained environments and say, what we need is more resources. You just can't. So you've got to say, these are the issues that we think are problematic or not working, and these are the things that would address them, and these things have a catalytic effect. If you did this, it would actually improve this, and these are the resources we need to do that. It's got to be that kind of cat-rat map. And I think we've got to work on 1 or 2 big ideas. Now, I'm not going to tell you what they should be. That's really a matter for you. 1 or 2 ideas that are going to grab the public's attention, that are actually going to go to those root cause problems and the kind of priority of problems, but are going to get people's imagination kind of at work. One thing is workplaces and workforce participation, and I think there's tremendous amount of stuff that we could do there with the business community, and of course it has that catalytic effect, as the KPMG report shows, of kind of overall well-being. I don't know what the others are, but if there's more than 3, there's too many. Then I think we've got to have unity of message and consistency of message. The people who are really effective at advocacy stay on a couple of things, and they push them and they push them and they push them. And whether you agree with me about company tax or not, my God, I have pushed that issue because I passionately believe it's the right thing to do for the country. But if I had gone off on another folly, then you don't get that sort of national debate happening. So unity of message, if politicians hear 46 different things or they hear contradictory messages, the dilution effect is devastating, absolutely devastating. So if they've got people marching in their offices saying, well, actually, you know, that's not what the last person who came into my office told me. They told me something completely different. Or actually, no, people don't agree with you about that. It is a devastation for getting prioritisation of things. So consistency, unity, and persistence of that message. The next thing is clarity and precision. Actionable things. So the Prime Minister is an actionable person. Mr. Shorten is an actionable person. Give them things that they can act on, that are in the realm of doable, that are in the realm of affordable, and have a clear pathway to improving things. So whenever I hear we need early intervention, I think, yeah, we know that, but what is it that we're actually talking about? And what are the specific things that would actually change things? And I think, you know, as someone who was a senior public servant, when people give you problems without ideas, you just say, I can't solve for that. But if we give them problems, but here's the thing that will fix it, and here's the exact thing that will fix it. Not, you know, let's have more early intervention. It's, you know, we've all heard that before. It will not cut the mustard. And then persisting over the next 12 months with those, you know, 3 or 4 ideas that you develop today and over the course of the next few months. And my final point, I guess, is optimism. This is, I said this to you last year, and I feel very passionately about this. Cynicism is the death of action. It's the kind of recipe for inertia. It's the recipe for conflict. You can't be cynical about getting things done. You can't be cynical about partisanship. You've got to say, and we've got a lot to work with, as I said, we've got both sides of politics who know this is a problem, who are committed to doing something about this. So let's give them something that they can work with, something tangible, and we stay on that issue. But if we come back with a 75-page, 296 ideas, it's not going to run. That's one thing I can assure you. And we have to have optimism that we can get stuff done. And we have to work collaboratively to do that. And I know people kind of say, oh, yeah, we get that. But the number of times I hear people saying, it's hopeless, it's not going to work, government's hopeless, everything's not working, people eventually just switch off to that because they feel they can't solve for it. But if we say, look, this bit's working well, this bit's not working well, if we did this, it would actually turn it around. So Frank's point about our budget submission to say, look, if you just funded the things you'd committed to, and these were important things, we'd actually get some traction and we'd actually start to turn stuff around. So you've got to kind of, I think, use this day and then the kind of subsequent things to think about the sorts of things that are going to solve the principal problems, are the priorities to be fixed, that can be phased in over time, that are realistic and are going to capture people's imagination. And I think if we do that, we will actually get some traction. And now I think we've got to say to ourselves, if we think about where we want to be at next year's budget, and assuming there's an election next year, we've got to ask ourselves, what would success look like? I think that's a really important place, Frank, to start today. For me, success will look like this, that there is a huge debate about mental health in the next election, but a debate that is not simplistic and not political opportunism, a debate that we have framed up optimistically with ideas, not problems, and a debate where people are committing to realistic solutions, and a debate where there is a genuine contest of ideas and people actually think this is a serious battleground, and it is. And you go out to a regional community where I was, this is a really serious issue for regional communities, as is chronic youth unemployment. Go to Townsville, where there's 14% youth unemployment, Cairns 17% youth unemployment. You don't have much of a debate about the need for investment, but also the implications of that in terms of the mental well-being of those communities. So let's give ourselves a KPI that it's not just a rhetoric debate, it's not just a divisive debate, it's not a debate that says we'll prioritise this with no actual priorities, and how often have we seen that in this issue and many others, but it's a debate where there's a genuine contest of initiatives and ideas that we have influenced. And that by the next budget, there is a serious set of commitments on a couple of things. And there's some serious money on the table. And now that's what I think our job is, to say, well, what are those things? And sometimes you're going to have to say somebody's priority is more important than mine in the scheme of things. That is, if we take the kind of big picture, that issue is actually more urgent than something that I feel passionately about. One of the organisations I've had a lot to do with is an organisation called the Purple House, which is a dialysis services group for Indigenous people in Alice Springs. And anyway, cut a long story short, during the Olympics, they sold some very famous artwork, raised $1 million, and set up this dialysis centre and this home-based dialysis centre. But the people who ran it put themselves last, because they basically said, we'll wait until these people who are much more remote than us get their dialysis services, because that's the right thing to do. And I think the one thing that I would really encourage us is to think about what's the right thing to do, what's the right priority to pursue versus kind of our idea, and make sure that we send to government and the opposition a very clear set of priorities that are uncontested, and where we've done the work on the actionable things that would address them. Because if there's kind of woolliness, or there's conflict, or there's just competition, which I think is always unhelpful, then we will not get traction. There are many things that could become big debates in the next election. Let's make sure that our issue is one of them.